Hey ghouls and gals, welcome back to my channel. My name is Taylor and today's video is going to be my September wrap-up. So I really only have one day a week to sit down and film sit-down videos. Unfortunately, nature decided to play a fun little trick on me and get me super sick leading up to my favorite month of the year, which just has not been fun. I spent pretty much a week in bed, not doing much of anything, and today is the first day where I am feeling better and I don't have work. So if I sound a little sniffly, a little gravelly, that is why. It's not COVID, it's just a cold, but it's very annoying nonetheless. But here I am to film my September wrap-up for you guys. In the month of September, I read 8 books, and I feel like I definitely could have read more, but the end of the month I read a book that kind of put me in a reading slump, and then also I got a little bit sick, so I'm still not mad at it. 8 books is pretty good in a month. I just have a huge TBR for October. I will leave a link somewhere if you haven't seen that already, but I'm planning on reading a lot more books in October, so hopefully I can read more than 8 books next month, but 8 books for September is not bad. So I'm just going to talk about the books in the order that I liked them, going from worst to best. So unfortunately, the least favorite book that I read this month was House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski. You guys, I am so bummed about this one. I got this for Christmas a couple years ago, and I really thought that I was going to love this one. It had so many different things that I love in fiction. It deals with a haunted house, a family moving into a creepy, mysterious house with a lot of mysteries. It has a story within a story aspect, and then it does have sort of a found footage feel as well as a very unique format. We've got all sorts of different types of pages in this book. Very mixed media, very experiential. This book has a very big cult following, and I think there's like a lot of forums and discussion on this. This book is about 20 years old now, but it is a cult classic. There are so many people still talking about this book, still talking about different things that they think are contained in this book or secrets involving the text, and I didn't like it. I thought the formatting was very cool, but just the way that the different stories were written, it feels like a textbook in a lot of ways and not great ways. And while I was interested in the story about a family who moves into a house that is way bigger on the inside than it is on the outside, you are constantly getting interrupted by fake quotes, fake citations to textbook, and other sort of like scholarly resources. A lot of times this feels like a paper, which is really cool in terms of formatting of the book, but just really not fun to read. And then the person who is doing a lot of chronicling of this story, the story within a story aspect, is just inserting his life into the margins, so you really have to go back and forth between the two different stories, and I just really did not care about his point of view at all. I'm a big character-driven reader, and there was really nothing in here that I enjoyed. I didn't really think the characters were written well at all, but it was a really big disappointment, and it was a slog to get through, and I am bummed that I didn't like this one more because I had planned on doing a whole reading vlog for this book, but I just can't stress enough how much of like not the book this was for me. I think if you really enjoy books that have really strange and unique premises and formatting, you'll really enjoy this one, as well as someone who is looking for something very new and novel in their books. You're going to find this here. This is definitely more of like a structure-driven and format-driven novel as opposed to the character-driven books that I tend to enjoy. The next book that I read in September was The Last Flight by Julie Clarke. Now, I enjoyed this one, however, this is kind of marketed as a high-stakes thriller, and while there are some thriller aspects, I think most of the thrilling things sort of happen as plot points towards the beginning. Other than that, this is a very, almost more of a literary fiction book with some thrilling elements rather than a thriller, so keep that in mind when you are picking this up. This really doesn't have the pacing or the tone of a thriller, in my opinion, as well as some aspects of this book where I felt like they were supposed to be big big dramatic plot twists and were supposed to shock you. I feel like you know what they could be. I unfortunately was able to guess from the beginning what those plot points were, but I don't see that as necessarily a big deal. But if you're reading this as more of a thrilling literary novel, I don't think that'll bother you too much because it is more focused on the women's reactions to the things that happen to them instead of the things themselves. So it is more character driven. But this is about a woman who is running from her abusive husband. She meets a stranger in an airport and they swap flight itineraries. The plane that this woman is supposed to be on goes down and crashes, which really puts a kind of wrench in their plan. So now our main character is stuck in this stranger's life trying to figure out who this stranger is and why they wanted to get out of their life so badly. Now, I think this book was pretty good. It wasn't anything that is going to be super memorable for me, but I think had this book been a lot longer and focused on the literary fiction aspects as opposed to the thriller aspects, I do feel like this would have been a whole lot stronger. I did enjoy reading this one. I just don't ultimately think it's going to have any sort of lasting power on me. But from reviews of this one, a lot of people said that it handled some really intense, tough topics very well. So look for trigger warnings. There are deaths, domestic abuse in here, as well as drug addiction and drug paraphernalia, just to name a few of the triggers in here. So if you are looking for a thriller that is more character driven and more internal than external events happening to a person, I would recommend this one. I just think it's a very middle of the road thriller, and I think it would have benefited from being a little more fleshed out. The next book that I read in September was Mallory by Josh Malerman. This is the sequel to Bird Box. Bird Box was one of the best books that I read in 2018, and I really enjoyed it. This one didn't have the same effect that Bird Box had on me. I did think it was really well done. I know a lot of people were really concerned about there being a sequel to Bird Box because I don't think Bird Box needed a sequel. But if there was going to be a sequel, I think this did some really great things, and I definitely don't think it was a disappointment. I don't think it's going to be as scary as Bird Box for anyone who's read it because you are in the same world just a few years down the road. So there's not really as much of a mystery element as what these creatures are and the horror of kind of experiencing an apocalypse and the ruination of our society. It's more of an introspective book, kind of looking through how we move on. Can we even begin to rebuild a society and think of ourselves as a more interconnected society rather than just being what once was. So I did really enjoy those aspects. I thought the characterization and the writing were on point. I listened to this in a single setting at work while I was doing a floor set. It definitely is a shorter book. I really enjoyed the characters more than I enjoyed the plot, and I think in some aspects that can be forgiven because this definitely focused more on the characters and how they would survive rather than the first book being about how to survive physically and how to survive just in terms of a apocalypse sort of event. This one's kind of focusing on how do you mentally survive, potentially just living your life in this postmodern world, and how human beings could potentially rebuild society and gain a larger sense of community. So I thought this was a really interesting read. I don't think it's going to let you down if you're really, really concerned about it. I think Bird Box stands brilliantly on its own, but if you are interested in reading the sequel, I do think it does a good job at expanding and continuing from the source material. It just does feel like a different tone of a book. The next book that I'm going to talk about is Heir by Sarah J. Maas. This is the third book in the Throne of Glass series. I thought this one was probably the most interesting one to date. It's really interesting seeing the tonal change and even the audience change as well from the first two books to this book. Especially Throne of Glass, I feel like it is a YA that is like the perfect book for people who are reading middle grade and want to get into YA, or really just enjoy YA, those type of readers, and then moving on through this series. I think the first two books are young adult, but could even be for some more mature, younger readers. Now, Heir, this third book, the tone completely changes. This feels like older YA to even a little bit adult in terms of the themes, and I feel like through the rest of this series, it is going to kind of verge between YA and adult. I can see why people really did not enjoy this one. Not a lot happens. It's a very character-driven book. A lot of characters are kind of being introduced. A lot of characters are going through some internal struggles to kind of get their motivation for the rest of the series to come. I really enjoyed this one, but I definitely see how reading the first two as a YA reader, you might get some whiplash from reading this one, and just because it is so different in tone. I primarily read adult fiction, so this definitely is not like the most adult fantasy that I've ever read, but I really did enjoy the explorations of grief and trauma, and I feel like Sarah J. Maas, no matter what you think of her, I think she does a really good job exploring kind of the psychological impact that characters can have in these high fantasy settings. I feel like there are so many fantasy books where some really terrible things happen to our main characters, and you know, they need to go to therapy, obviously, but it's a fantasy setting, and it is nice to see some characters in this book really have to grapple with the emotional toll that being in a war would have on a person. So I did really enjoy this one. I'm not the biggest fan of kind of the romance dynamics that were introduced in here. I'm hoping they get a little bit better throughout the rest of the series, but there were some really cool characters introduced in here as well that I'm looking forward to reading more about. The next book is short and sweet. It's a graphic novel, Teen Titans Beast Boy by Garcia, illustrated by Gabriel Picolo. This is just a really fun time. I loved the Teen Titans as a kid. I love them now. This is the second book in an introductory sort of series to kick off a new iteration of the Teen Titans. I just think the artwork is really good and the character work is really great as well. The first in the series was Raven. She's my favorite Teen Titan, so it was really cool seeing that, but I really enjoyed seeing Beast Boy's origin story as well. I'm excited to see where this series goes in the future, and I'm excited to see the Teen Titans kind of start to merge together and form a group. So the next volume of this is Beast Boy Loves Raven, and that comes out next year, I believe. The next book is a book that has been on my TBR for the longest time, and I'm so glad that I finally read it, and that would be Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. If you like traditional Gothic literature, I think you will really enjoy this one. It's one of the best classics that I've read in a while. It's pretty incredible reading this knowing that Mary Shelley was about 18 years old when she wrote this, and that this is pretty much the pioneer of science fiction. So if you're looking for a Gothic blend of Gothic literature and science fiction, highly recommend this one. Spooky season's coming up, so this is a great October read. It's not too horrifying, so if you're not big on gory books, I think this would be the perfect Halloween read for you. It's crazy how much of this source material no one knows about. I feel like everyone knows Frankenstein, everyone knows that name, and I just think it's crazy that, you know, everyone knows the name Frankenstein, everyone knows like the it's alive and this mad scientist creating a monster, but really none of the adaptions that I've seen of this source material have really captured the core of what this story is. This is incredibly sad, it's incredibly introspective. No one has a good time in this book. It is very Gothic. All of the characters are going through it. It is pretty slow moving, but I highly enjoyed this one. I think it's really incredible seeing what this has done to both the horror fiction genres and the science fiction genres. So if you're looking to read a classic, this is a highly accessible one. It's pretty short as well. So if you tend to like Gothic literature, this is a really cool book to read as well because it doesn't focus on a singular castle setting. It almost focuses on the outdoors as a setting in and of itself and kind of uses that as a metaphor for different characters' mental states and loneliness and just the experience of what it means to be alone, what it means to be a human. So I thought that was really cool. So I really enjoyed getting to read this one, and I'm really glad that I finally did. Now, this next book is one of the reasons why I love Book of the Month so much, is because it does introduce me to books that never would have been on my radar radar and I probably would never have picked up had it not been for the service. And a lot of times these books end up being some of my favorite or most unique reads of the year, so that's pretty cool. That's going to be Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. This is a wild, fantastical ride. I think it's best to go into this book blind. This is a kind of darker fantasy science fiction sort of hybrid. I think this would be another book that would be really good to read in October if you're looking for a creepy, atmospheric book that isn't too horrifying. I think this one would absolutely do it for you. I don't want to give too much about the plot because it is shorter and it's just such an experience because you don't really know what you're getting into. And the whole book honestly feels like a dream where you're reading it and it does feel like a description that, you know, those dreams when you're having the dream, everything makes total sense and then you wake up and you realize that nothing really did and it was just dream logic. That's what this whole book feels like. But just as a bare bones synopsis, this book is about a man who finds himself in a world where the entire world is one huge house and a bunch of ocean surrounding it, and he is just kind of exploring the house, chronicling the house. He knows this world is not his native world, but he doesn't know where he's come from, and he can't remember anything else before living in this world. So if you're looking for a completely bizarre reading experience, it is very atmospheric, it is very dreamlike and whimsical, and you don't really know what's happening in this one. So this definitely is not a book for everyone, but I think that if you like truly bizarre books, this darker fantasy is going to be right up your alley. I do highly recommend this one. Like I said, I don't really know how else to best describe this one just because it's a journey, and it's a journey best, you know, going in completely blind because I didn't know a lot about this one before picking it up, and I think that's the best possible way to go into a book like this one. And then last, but certainly not least, we have my favorite book that I read this month, which is a complete surprise to me because it's not a genre that I normally read, and that is going to be The First Sister by Linden A. Lewis. This is the first book in a space opera epic. I believe it is going to be a trilogy, and if you like the Star Wars movies, and if you like lighter science fiction that has some really cool, compelling, diverse characters, and that is kind of starting off in a very small section, then you're going to absolutely love this book. This is following multiple characters on different sides of a war. So in this futuristic novel, Earth is one of 4 planets in our solar system that humans live on and have colonized, and there is an ongoing battle for domination of our solar system between the people who live on these different planets. One side of the war is very almost religious based and are in many ways less technology advanced than we are currently right now. And then the other side of the war is the other 2 planets that humans have colonized, and they are ultra on the side of scientific progress, almost to a fault, where potentially they are seeking scientific progress before any sort of humanitarian progress for humans. So humans are essentially at war with each other. The humans on, I believe, Earth and Mars are fighting against the humans that have colonized, I believe, Mercury and Venus. You get to follow people from both sides of this conflict as they all sort of begin to see that war is definitely not a black and white operative, and there are definitely a lot of shades of gray, and potentially neither side is the right or the just side, and that this war is not the best thing. And ultimately, despite what leaders on both sides are saying, is not for the greater good of humanity, but more selfish reasons. The first person we follow is First Sister. She is a part of a convent of women who serve people of Earth and Mars, and they are designed as pretty much comfort women for the soldiers in the conflict so that they have someone to confess their sins to and to receive some stress release. So we follow her as she kind of starts to see that this is not a glorious role, this is a very traumatic role, and she wants nothing more to do with it, and she has to figure out how to get out of this essentially sex slavery slavery that women have been forced into, and she has to do so, unfortunately, without a voice because all of the women in this convent have had their ability to speak neurologically removed. So she is essentially voiceless, trying to fight for herself and her autonomy. We also follow Leto, who is on the other side of the war, who lives on Venus, who is a very wonderful fighter, but after a mission goes horribly wrong, he's kind of brought down the ladder a few pegs and is no longer trusted as much by his commanders. He is sent on an ultra-secret mission to bring in and assassinate his former partner, who has gone rogue and gone over to the other side of the war. And then the third point of view that we are following is Hero, and Hero is Leto's former partner, and they have been trained as an assassin. They are such an asset to their side of the war, but they've supposedly defected and taken a side, and their point of view is really interesting because Hero's point of view is actually a series of videotapes that they leave for their partner Leto, explaining their decision to kind of turn traitor and turn against everything that they had been using their whole life to fight for. All three of these characters are going to intersect in a very major way, and this is just the beginning of a really cool epic space opera story. So I'm very excited to see where this story takes us. This is very character driven, but a ton happens. It's not the biggest book in the world in terms of I'm very much used to huge fantasy series, but so much happens in this book and the pacing is excellent that you feel like you're reading a much longer book, not because it's slow, but because so many things happen and it's so brilliantly paced from beginning to end. So I highly recommend this book. If you take just one recommendation from this video, I hope you pick up this book because I think it's absolutely wonderful. I think people who generally tend to not like sci-fi so much would really enjoy this one. It definitely is a lighter sci-fi book. It's definitely on the lighter side of sci-fi, but I think that people who do read sci-fi would find a lot in here to be excited about as well. So there you have it. Those are the 8 books that I read in the month of September, and that is going to be the end of this video. If you liked it, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe for more content from me, leave a comment down below, and make sure you are subscribed because I have a ton of spooky seasonal content coming in the month of October. But that is going to be it for this video, so stay safe, stay well, and I will catch you on the next one. Bye!